If you'd like to support this channel, we invite you to check us out on Patreon. Thank you so much. Hey, what's up guys? We were out mowing the other night and the flex coupling on the cutting head shattered. So today I'm going to show you how to change that out on the Flex 2100. So on the Flex 2100, you have two of these flex couplings. One goes here, one's on the other side of your reel, and then you have this coupler in between. And so this is the piece that shattered the other night. And the way we have to go about changing this is you've got to remove the cutting head to get to this pin, to get this one removed. And then we actually have to take the transmission apart a little bit to get the gear out of here that we need to be able to change this out properly. You can't do it without damaging the transmission if you don't take it apart. So that's why I want to show you how to do it properly. And these pieces right here, what they're designed for, this is the actual flex part of how this mower works. I showed you guys before that the cutting head can move forwards and backwards and left and right. And these little devices here, this is what Toro came up with that allows the drive system to flex with that cutting head as it moves over the terrain. So these pieces are really cool how they work. They are very strong, but you know, mine are just wore out from cycle after cycle of just being driven. And you know, this mower's got nearly 800 hours on it, so they're wore out. So I'm gonna show you how to change this one out, and I'm gonna step you through that process. All right, so to remove the cutting head, first thing you wanna do is always set that kickstand. I've showed you guys that before when you do a back lap. That way the mower doesn't fall over backwards. So set the kickstand in the back, and then we're gonna remove these two screws here that hold the cutting head on. So normally when you have this drive system in here, it's back here where you have to pull the cutting head to the side and away from the unit. And the reason why I have to do that is there's a roll pin in this collar. I think a lot of you guys probably have that in there. The way this was originally designed to work is it was more of a twist and then it would rotate backwards. But I think there must have been a flaw in it because I've seen a lot of golf courses have put these roll pins through here to keep that from moving the way it was designed to. So that's the piece that's back there. So my cutting head's free because this broke off, but that collar mates up right here on the drive system for your cutting head. All right, so something I want to show you guys very specifically here. This is where that flex coupling is right here. And so you might think you can take a hammer and knock that roll pin out, but I'm telling you, you're going to damage all this right here. So don't do that. I'm going to walk you through how to take this apart. That way you don't damage this body right here. So depending on your mower, you may be able to take some of these connections apart to get the engine removed, because we got to remove it from here to get this coupling apart. And so my cabling, the way it's done, it's been crimped and kind of modified over the years, so I can't very easily just take all this apart. So the best way I found to take the engine apart and get it removed from the traction unit is if you'll just take out these two bolts here on the bottom, and what I'm pointing to is the bottom of this raised piece of metal that the engine sits on. You can take the engine off of this piece, but I found it to be a lot more difficult. It's hard to get everything lined back up with your drive system. So if you just take these two bottom pieces out, these two bolts, it'll make removing this engine a lot easier. And you'll see here in a minute that I can actually just take the engine off and rotate it counterclockwise, and I don't have to disconnect everything to do it. So these are just 1/2-inch bolts. All right, so the part that comes off is this point right here. So you've got two bolts in the back, you've got one here in the front. And you want to hang on to this because once this comes loose, the whole engine's loose. So you want to take care to hang on to this because there's a coupling here that your engine drives your transmission. And so you need to slide this back away from it. You don't want to just crash down on top of everything. So once you have all that loose, you can take the engine, back it away from the coupling, and this will lift up out of here. You can slowly turn it away. And you won't have to take everything apart. So that's your throttle cable, some of your electrical cabling, So everything can just sit off to the side. So just to show you what we got going here, you got all your electrical cabling, nothing's in a bind. There's a nice curve in the throttle cable, so it's not too bad of a bind either. So I've got everything just propped up on here. You know, if you need to put a block of wood or something underneath it, a brick, whatever, go ahead. But I've got mine braced between here and the concrete, so it won't go anywhere. This is the coupling I was talking about. This is just a rubber coupling that connects your engine to your transmission. So once we get over here to the transmission side, there's a few things we got to do. We need to take apart this cover. We're going to loosen the belt tensioner that's right here. And then we've got to take, there's another pulley in here that we're going to take off. Then we'll be able to remove this cover and everything will come apart for us. This cover here has 2 bolts on it. They're 3/8. We'll back these out. And so all this is just a guard to keep your hands away from that rubber coupling. So what we have here is another gear, and it has 2 sets of set screws in it. And it's very similar to the gears that are inside of your cutting head. And so these are 1/8 inch set screws. And you want to take your time with these. Again, just like you would on the cutting head, just make sure you don't strip them out, cause yourself some grief. So you're going to take these set screws loose, back them off. Getting this off takes a little bit of finesse. You got to kind of pry on it, but you got to be very careful because this is an aluminum housing, so you don't want to bust it. So you got to be very careful with it. You don't want to pry on it too hard. And actually what it takes is a little bit of back and forth of tapping this in to knock it loose, wiggling it out to get it apart. So just take your time with it. Don't do this action or you're going to bust this. And in some cases you may need like a pulley or a bearing puller to set up across here to pull this off of here. I've already had mine off several times, so I know that I'm able to get it apart.
I thought that was going to be too loud.
Yeah, that's it. So once you have that off, just make note of that keyway. It should stay in there, but just know that it can come out, so don't lose it. Keep it faced up, that way you don't accidentally drop it and lose it later. So you can see how that mates up with the rubber coupling, how that works. Just goes over there, and that's how it spins your transmission. All right, so this next step is very important. What we got to do is loosen off the belt tensioner. There's a belt that runs all along inside of here through a series of pulleys, and it's got quite a bit of tension on it. And so we got to loosen that tension off. Otherwise, if you go straight to taking this cover off, everything just wants to fly out at you. So to do that, it's a 3/8 wrench onto this little piece here. And you want to hang on to this. It's not going to go flying. It's not under that great amount of tension. And I'll show you how that works. It's actually got a little bit of a cam system in it, so it can't just go flying. But you want to loosen that off. So all it takes is just a 1/4 turn, and you'll feel it click, and the tension is off the belt. But it's a very important step that you do that first. All right, so now we've gotten that tension off of the belt. Everything is safe to take apart now. And so you want to remove all these little screws that are in this cover. And at this point, you don't have to worry about everything falling out or, you know, all these pulleys just coming apart on you. You don't have to worry about that. Everything that's in there is secure. The first time I took that apart, I was a little nervous about that, but I'll show you here in a second that everything stays put. Okay, so when you get down to the last screw, I'd advise you just hang on to this cover, because if you're real gentle with it, you can get it off where you don't tear the gasket. Otherwise, if you let it just fall, it'll tear the gasket. And if you weren't prepared for that, you're gonna have to order another one and wait for it before you can put all this back together. So hang on to that cover as you take this last screw out. And if you're opening it up for the first time since purchasing it from a golf course, you might as well get another gasket, because I can assure you it's going to tear. It's been underneath a lot of heat and a lot of cold, depending on where it came from. So that gasket's going to be wore out. So we'll see if we can get mine off without tearing it. So sometimes you can just kind of wiggle on it a little bit, and this will all easily come off. Okay, so there's the inside of that plate. Okay, so my gasket is stuck to this side of it, so we're gonna be gentle with it, keep it there, that way we don't lose it. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. I know the sunlight's coming in this way. So the way all this operates is this was the main drive from your engine. So when you crank up the engine, this is always spinning. This piece right here is always spinning. And in fact, this belt and this entire system is spinning because that belt tensioner I showed you right here has all that engaged. So as the motor runs, the belt spins, and you know that there's two positions on that drive arm. You know, there's one for transport, and if you kick it left, that's transport and mow at the same time. And so what's happening when you do that is when you kick it into transport, it pulls together back here and engages the transmission. So you have the clutch up here, and when that makes contact, it makes this drive, and this is what drives your transmission over here. That's just a pulley to guide the belt, same here. And then this cable is the one when you take that arm and you kick it left and engage it, this is what engages your reel. And so that arm comes down here, and what happens is there's a set of teeth, a set of pulleys here that get moved together, and that's what makes this come together and it start to spin as well. So it's kind of neat how all that works. So it's kind of nice, you know, to understand that, you know, when you're trying to troubleshoot and trying to figure out what might be an issue with either transmission or the drive system, you have the understanding that when that engine's running, the whole belt system's running. So is it a part of something wrong in the transmission, whether it's here or back here in your transmission piece, or if it's an issue up here on the front end for your real drive system. So just to show you what I'm talking about, how this belt tensioner works, you can kind of see how all that moves together. So it's kind of on a cam system, just like I mentioned there earlier. So as you bring this forward, it pushes that pulley into the belt and tightens it up. And so that's how it doesn't all come flying loose, is because it's on this cam right here, and it's just a quarter click, and all that backs out of there nice and easily for you. All right, so next step is, now that this is loose, what we've got to do is get this belt off of here. And to do that, you just kind of slide it off of these pulleys. And the easiest way to go about that is probably down here at the bottom. You can see how easily that comes off of there. I'm being careful not to tear my gasket. And I just move that out of the way. Now, something I'd advise you to be careful about is don't get grease on here. There shouldn't be any grease in here. These are sealed bearings, so you don't want to come in here with some lubricants and spray all that up, because it's just going to fling all that lubricant everywhere inside of here and mess up your belt. It's going to slip. It doesn't need any of that. All these are sealed bearings. So just remove that belt, move it out of the way, and then we can work on getting this other piece out of here. Okay, so in order to get this out of here, you actually have to take this cam lever out of here. And to do that, we've got to loosen off this nut. So this can get a little tricky, especially if these are froze up, because adjusting this linkage has an effect on it engaging the reel. So you want to pay extra attention to make sure that this piece doesn't spin as you back this off. And again, I've been through mine before, so I know it'll back off easily. But the first time, this will be seized up, so you'll need to grab this with some pliers and take extra care to just back off this top nut so that you don't change the linkage in the rest of this system here. So once that's loose, you can just take this off to the side. Don't let the spring fool you. It's not going to fling apart. All it is it just keeps tension to make the reel disengage whenever you let off that lever up top. So all it is a couple washers and a few star washers that you divide equally over this mounting point right here. So once that's loose, everything's okay there. All right, so this next step is kind of tricky. So what you have right here is there's a pin that runs down through here. And the way you have to get this off is there's a spring clip on the back of it, on this back side. So it takes a special pair of pliers to release that spring clip and get it to move off back here. And it takes a few tries, but you want to keep your hand over it so it doesn't go flying. just like that. So what you have to do is pry this apart, and it slides back off of that pin, and then you hook these back pieces and pull it out of there. All right, so there's nothing that's going to fall off the back side of here. The white, maybe yellow, the plastic piece you see there, that's just a bushing. And so this piece just comes straight forward out of here, this pin. And don't worry about the gears, because there's only one way that can mate up with what's inside there. So you don't have to be paying attention to how that needs to go back together. Okay, so now that this pin is out of here, that's going to allow this piece to come forward. And it just slides out like that. So this whole entire thing comes out. And I'll break this down and show you guys what this is all about. All right, so this piece right here is how the entire part of your cutting head works. So if you can see this right here, this is the pulley I was mentioning where the belt rides. So this piece is always spinning. And whenever you engage your lever to mow and for the cutting head to start, what happens is this gets shifted over. And when that comes over, these teeth mate up, and that's what starts the drive on the reel. And whenever you disengage that lever, this kicks back out and this remains spinning. So you can see now why I said you don't want to take a hammer and start beating on this pin, or you're going to risk damaging everything inside of here. And I can guarantee you those are some very expensive parts. So you'll find it's a whole lot easier. Just get this out here where we can knock that pin out. So this step can be a little challenging, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to put this in the vise and crank down on it, because this is aluminum and you'll deform it. And to be honest with you, that may have been what I've done at one time, and that's probably why this busted on me. And so what you want to do is just set your vise up to where you have a surface to work on that'll support this coupling, but it'll still let that pin pass through. And all I'm going to do is use this punch right here to knock that roll pin through. So once you have it all kind of stable like that, keep a hand on the main parts of your system, you can start working on that roll pin. And it shouldn't take a whole lot. You can see that pin starting to come through. And that's it. And so if you don't know what a roll pin is, it's a spring-loaded pin basically. It has a slot down the center of it, and so it springs out naturally, and that's what holds it in place. So it takes a special set of punches. This is a roll pin punch here, and so that's what allows you to punch that all the way through, because it's the same width, and it allows you to get that all the way through your pieces of metal and get that pin out of there. So as I mentioned earlier, on the cutting head side, you're going to have another one of these. It comes apart because of that coupler. I'm going to knock this one out as well. And if you're doing these for the first time, it's a great idea to take some oil and put it on top of these roll pins on both sides of this and let it sit and penetrate that for a little while, and make getting these out a whole lot easier. Something else you may experience is these pins might shatter. When I first bought my mower, that happened to me because the pin was all rusted up, because it sat on the East Coast somewhere, and a lot of the salt in the air is what corroded some of this metal that was in here. So you may experience that too, that sometimes this may shatter and all your equipment looks okay, but this is spinning. Well, that's what it is. You've got a sheared pin. So same story, you gotta knock the pin out of the coupling and knock the pin out of the drive of piece, whichever one it is, whether it's on the reel itself or in the transmission. So here's my new coupling. I'm gonna reuse these roll pins because they're still in really great shape. They haven't been in there but maybe a year. And so the way I like to go about it is just tap them in there to get them started. And you can look underneath here to see that you've got it in there far enough. And once you have that close, get this lined up and you can hammer it the rest of the way through. Something you'll notice is I'm not hammering these extremely hard. I'm just taking my time with it. And so once you get flush, what you'll see is you've got a little ways to go on the inner side. It's a good idea to take this punch and keep hammering it through a little ways. So what I'm looking for in here is I want to make sure that I've got about the same amount on both sides. That tells me that the pin is centered up. All right, so when you get to this part, this gets a little tricky, but you got to put the cover plate back on, otherwise this won't all fit. And that's again because I have this roll pin through this coupling. So put that cover plate on, and then we can start putting the rest of this together. But before we stick that in there, I'll go ahead and get this roll pin set. And so before you go pounding on that, take this punch on the back side to make sure everything's lined up first. So once all that's lined up, when you take this and punch that through, it'll be a whole lot easier for it to go through. So I'm taking care not to hammer on this, on these pieces or on the cover plate. I'm just hammering on the roll pin and the flex coupling. And again, you want that pin to be centered between both sides. So I'm going to give a few hits on this side. So now that that's all centered up, we can put it back on the mower. Okay, so this may be a little hard to see with all this going on, but what we're going to do is take this tire setup and we're going to put it back in here. And so on this side, what you have is you've got a bearing that everything rides on, and then you've got this piece that I told you before that pin goes through. So we're going to line everything back up in here. And once you have that back in there, this pin on the front goes back in. Like I told you earlier, there's only one way it can match up, and it's because there's a groove in this piece in here that makes all that line back up. So you don't have to worry about which way that needs to go. You can go ahead and split these washers and star washers apart and set that back to hold everything in place. So once we get back to this side, you just got to set this belt back on. So we're taking care to work that back around. And the thing to pay attention to at this point is you've got a grooved belt, grooved pulley here, grooved pulley from your engine side, and a grooved pulley back here. The rest of them are smooth. So as long as the grooves line up on that, you're good to go. So that last gasket of mine actually had a tear on it down here at the bottom because I had some grass built up down here. So I've got another gasket I'm going to put on. So I'm just going to work this around these parts. And something you'll notice on here is there's a set of pins. There's one at the top and one at the bottom here. And what it does is it helps you line up this gasket and hold it in place while you get everything put back together. So that'll kind of hold that gasket in place for us. And then we can start to work this cover plate back on. So what I'm paying attention to at this point is being careful not to crush the gasket. And so the next part of this is this pin runs through here. Got to remember to put this spring clip back on. And so you can kind of just press it on by hand for it to hold. And just take a screwdriver and press up against it, and you'll hear it click back in place. And when it spins freely, that's how you know it's back in the groove. It's not going to go anywhere. So at this point, we can tighten this back up right here. Again, taking care not to spin your cable, so that way everything stays lined up the way it should, and we don't change the linkage between here. Well, it's actually down here. That way we're not changing this linkage of how those teeth I showed you go together. So all I'm going to do is tighten this up so it doesn't move, and that has that in place. So now the next step is going to be to put the screws back into the cover plate. Alright, so this next part is pretty critical. You want to make sure you use Loctite on these. So I put a little bit of Loctite on the threads of these screws here. And I'm not going to over tighten them. I'm just going to do them by hand to start with, because we're going to torque these. And when you put a new gasket on, you might find it helpful to take that same roll punch and put it in that hole, and just make sure that your gasket's in the right spot before you go cram the bolt through there. So that's why we're not tightening anything up at this point. We just want it to keep everything centered up, everything in place, so we can make sure that gasket's seated right. The reason I think it's important to use Loctite on these is it's important that this housing stays sealed up, because dirt and debris getting in there, inside the belt, inside the transmission, inside the clutch, You know, you're just asking for trouble. So that's why I take the extra step to, see that gasket wasn't lined up right there. So that's why I take the extra step putting the Loctite on here, as well as torque it to the proper setting, just to make sure this housing seals up the best that it can. So at this point, we've got everything kind of hand tight. We've got the gasket centered up everywhere that needs to be. And I keep saying we're going to torque these to the right setting. So in the book, whenever you look through the manual, it says to torque these aluminum housings to 90 inch-pounds. So I'm going to set my torque wrench to 90 inch-pounds. If you've never used a torque wrench before, you're going to feel it click when it hits the right spot. Just like that. And so I like to alternate. Instead of going around in a pattern, I like to alternate so that this housing seats well. I know 90 inch-pounds doesn't seem like a lot, but it makes a big difference. Because, yeah, you can do this stuff by hand, but all this is aluminum, and you just don't want to risk stripping it out. So once I have it set, give it a once over, and everything's sealed up and good and ready to go. So, something we just want to double check, think back through. Make sure your gasket's sealed up right. Make sure your housing's on correctly. Make sure you've got this pin through here. Make sure you put the spring clip back on back here in the back. And everything should be in a good spot. So, last step to remember is to go ahead and tension up the belt tensioner. So again, it's a 1/4 turn. It doesn't take a lot, but it sets everything inside so that you're ready to mow. So then this pulley goes back on. Again, there's the keyway at the top. Line that back up. And really all it needs to be is just flush with that drive right there. Just a few taps of the hammer. Centers that back up. These are 1/8 inch set screws. You don't have to overdo these, don't strip them out. It's not going anywhere. So the next part is we can put the engine and get it mounted back up here. And what we need to pay attention to is when we have that coupling up here, we've got to kind of recenter the engine right here, so that way you don't cause a bunch of up and down motion that starts wearing out that coupler. So you want to try to get that lined up the best you can. I'll show you what I mean by that. This part can be a little tricky, but get the engine set back over here. Have this screw handy that goes back in this plate up here in the front. Just make sure it's nearby, otherwise you're going to have to do this again. So see that rubber collar makes back up. And again, holding the front, because you don't want to let it fall. So get that bolt started on the front. All right, so I've tried this several different ways before, and I think this is probably the easiest way to go about this. Like I mentioned before, you can take the engine off of this silver plate that it's sitting on. It's a lot harder to do, it's a lot harder to get everything lined back up. So that's why I leave the engine alone and just adjust this plate. All right, so looking at this right now, you can see that that's not straight because it's angled. And so we have the adjustability here at the front to set this the right way. So what we're looking for is two things. We don't want this to be pinched up too tight. We don't want it to be too wide apart. And you don't want it to be in an angle. So you have this adjustability up and down to make this line up right. So by using my hands underneath here and doing this right here, you can feel if it's straight, if it's at an angle, if it doesn't feel right. And so when I feel like I've got that pretty straight across there, that's when I tighten up this front bolt here. And when that's set, then all you have to do is set the back screws in the back and you're done. Everything's square. Whereas if you were to do that from the engine and take it apart, you'd have to realign it, get all kinds of tools out. It's just a headache. So to me, that's the easiest way to do it. There's a little bit of play here in the front so you can move it up and down, left and right, and get it all positioned. And that has proven to work for me time and time again, and I've yet to wear this coupling out or show any wear on it. So that's how I go about that. So while we're right here, let's go ahead and put this guard back on. And one quick note on the Loctite is make sure you use the blue one. It's called removable. Otherwise, if you use the red one, you will never be able to get this stuff out very easily. You don't need the red stuff. You just need a little bit of this blue to hold things in place to keep it from backing out. That's all it's for. And the reason I didn't put this guard on before I put the engine back on is because if I did, I couldn't see where I'm lining everything up. So that's why I'm doing it this way. And now I've got to take a wrench and tighten it up that way. So after we got the engine all lined up, all we had left to do was tighten up the 1/2-inch bolts on the back. All right, so let's get all that put back together, but you may be wondering, if I need to change this flex coupling, how do I do it? And this one's actually really easy to do. What you need to do is take this cover off the side and then take the sprocket off right here on this drive system right here. And once you do that, there's a bolt that you take loose and this entire piece will come apart. And then you can take it to your vise and you can knock these pins out and change this coupling out and put it all back together. You want to make sure that you take the time to take that apart, because I didn't the first time when I went to change these out, and I broke this piece right here, and that little guy was $300. So I'm telling you guys, it's worth all the extra time it takes to take these things apart and do it the right way. It'll save you a lot of money. And so this one's really easy to do. This one's obviously the most complicated one because you gotta take the transmission apart, but it's not difficult to do, you just gotta follow the right steps. So now that that's all finished, let's put this thing back together. Let's go give it a test mow and see if this thing works like it should. Alright, so that part worked out pretty good. I think we're going to be in good shape, and you can see the putting green's looking pretty good for this time of year, and everything's starting to cool down, slow down for us. So our season's coming to an end, but I need to get these collars mowed down. I'm a little behind on that because the mower's been broke. So we got some catch up to do, but hopefully you guys found this video helpful. If you have a Flex 2100 or even a Flex 21, a lot of the maintenance is pretty similar on both of those. And so if you ever are looking for maintenance videos, I got a handful of them on the channel, just showing you how to replace different parts and pieces that are a little more complex on these things. So check those out, and if you ever have questions about how some of this stuff works, hit me up. I send guys videos all the time off on the side, just how something works or how to fix it, or just give them some ideas on how to go about it. So I'd be more than happy to help you out anytime you need anything. Just hit me up. So I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. We'll see you in the next one.